Blonde hair, a trait often associated with Northern European descent, has a fascinating history that traces back to ancient civilizations. Although one might think that the love for blonde, beautiful hair came with modern beauty products and hair gels, push-up bras and thongs, then you might just want to rethink it, because men and women all around the world have always loved the light locks on a beautiful woman and preferred it over natural dark hair. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into the coming of the hot blondes and list every possible method of attracting these beautiful beings, because after getting to know everything about their history by the end of this video, you might just feel like getting yourself one of those hot blondes that everyone's always talking about. So without further ado, here's everything you need to know about hot blondes in just 20 fast minutes. Who else to begin with than the Greeks, who had a particular fascination with blonde hair, which was rare among their population. The rarity of blonde hair in Greece led to a high demand for blonde slaves, especially women, who were often sold at a higher price. These slaves were primarily from Northern Europe, predominantly from regions that are now parts of Germany, Scandinavia, and the Baltic states. This fascination was so intense that they often depicted their gods and goddesses, especially Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, with golden locks representing youth and purity. And children, especially royal ones, were often described as having golden hair, symbolizing their divine heritage and potential for greatness. So, as you'd expect, the ancient Greek women went nuts, trying to find ways to dye their hair blonde. They used a variety of methods, including natural substances like saffron, vinegar, and lemon juice, to achieve the desired golden hue. But the practice was not merely a beauty trick. It was deeply rooted in their societal norms and values, as blonde hair was often associated with higher social status and desirability. Women with blonde hair were considered more attractive and were often given preferential treatment. After all, who wouldn't dip their hair in vinegar for a free pretzel in the ancient Greek streets? In addition to this, the Greeks also believed that blonde hair had magical properties, as it was thought to bring good luck and ward off evil spirits. They get to be hot and free of evil spirits? Some are just luckier than others, I guess. Hopping on to the ancient Romans, where the fun with blondes is just getting started. There's no one in the whole wide world who loved blondes more than the ancient Romans, and for that, they have my utmost respect. They associated it with the exotic and foreign, often importing blonde-haired slaves from Gaul and Germany. The allure of blonde hair was further amplified by its rarity among the Romans. Most Romans had dark hair, making blonde hair an exotic and desirable trait. As a result, Roman women devised several methods to lighten their hair. One of the most popular methods involved the use of a plant-based brew. Women would soak their hair in a mixture made from the ashes of burnt plants and nuts. This mixture was believed to have bleaching effects, gradually lightening the hair over time. Another method was the use of fermented pigeon feces. The dung was mixed with other ingredients like vinegar and even urine and applied as a hair mask. The ammonia in the pigeon dung acted as a natural bleach, lightening the hair. Although it sounds unappealing by today's standards, this was a common practice in ancient Rome. The third method was the use of saffron and mullein, two plants known for their yellow pigments. These were boiled together and used as a rinse to give the hair a golden hue. These methods were not only used for aesthetic purposes, but also had practical applications. The lighter hair was believed to be less attractive to lice and other pests, thus serving a dual purpose. To counteract the damaging effects of the hair lightening treatments, women used a variety of nourishing hair masks and oils as well. Olive oil was a common ingredient in these hair care products due to its moisturizing properties. Honey was also used for its natural hydrating and lightening properties. Some of these products were made from exotic ingredients, such as crocodile fat and bear grease. Despite the effort and potential damage, the pursuit of blonde hair was a symbol of beauty and status in Roman society. It was also not uncommon for women to wear wigs made of blonde hair imported from Northern Europe, particularly from Germanic tribes. These wigs were not just fashion accessories, but symbols of wealth and status. The more extravagant the wig, the higher the social standing of the woman who wore it. The demand for blonde hair was so high that it led to the establishment of a thriving trade in blonde wigs. The hair was sourced from slaves or from women in the provinces who were paid to grow and cut their hair. This trade was so lucrative that it was regulated by the Roman government. Hair merchants would travel to the far reaches of the empire to procure blonde hair. The hair was then processed and made into wigs, which were sold in the markets of Rome and other major cities. However, not all blonde hair was considered equal, as the most prized was the so-called German gold, the hair of Germanic women, which was known for its bright golden hue. This hair was so valuable that it was often reserved for the wives and daughters of the emperor and the highest-ranking officials. Despite the high demand for blonde hair, the methods used to procure it were often brutal and inhumane. Slaves were routinely subjected to hair harvesting, a painful process that involved ripping the hair from the scalp, being a stark reminder of the darker side of the Romans' obsession with blonde hair. And the blonde madness didn't end with adults, nor living. It was common for Roman parents to lighten their children's hair, hoping to enhance their attractiveness and social standing. This practice was particularly prevalent among the upper classes, who saw it as a way to distinguish their children from the masses. And it extended into the afterlife as well, as it was common for Roman women to be buried with their blonde wigs, a practice that reflected the importance of physical appearance in Roman society, even in death. In addition to wigs, many Roman women were buried with their hair-lightening concoctions and hair care products. These items were seen as essential for maintaining their beauty in the afterlife. It was also common for the bodies of blonde slaves to be used in funeral pyres, their hair set alight as a final tribute to the deceased, as it was believed to appease the gods and ensure a safe journey for the deceased to the afterlife. Despite the widespread fascination with blonde hair, not all Romans embraced this beauty standard. Some Romans, particularly those of the older generation, viewed the obsession with blonde hair as a sign of moral decay, a departure from the traditional Roman values of modesty and simplicity. This tension between the old and the new, between tradition and innovation, was a recurring theme in Roman society, reflecting the dynamic and often contradictory nature of Roman culture. Some people just want to see the world burn, I guess. But there will always be those who oppose the beautiful in world, and we can't let their negativity stop us from achieving great things, like a world full of beautiful blondes and brunettes, but mainly blondes. And now, sailing to the far north, let's visit the Vikings, the true original blondes. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th to early 11th century, is a period of Nordic history that has been associated with the image of the hot blonde Vikings. The Vikings, originating from the Scandinavian regions of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and the Baltic region of Estonia, were a diverse group of seafaring traders, warriors, and explorers. Their physical appearance varied, influenced by their genetics and the environmental conditions of their homelands. The notion of the blonde Viking likely comes from the fact that the Scandinavian region has a high proportion of natural blondes. Approximately 50% of the population in the region carry the gene variant linked to blonde hair. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that all Vikings were blondes, as genetic diversity was present among the Viking populations due to their extensive travels and interactions with different cultures, leading to a mix of hair colors, including brown, red, and black. Interestingly, historical evidence suggests that Vikings might have artificially lightened their hair. Records from the time period indicate that Vikings used a strong soap with a high lye content to bleach their hair. This practice was not only for aesthetic purposes, but also had practical benefits. The lye in the soap helped to control head lice, just like in ancient Rome, a common problem in the Viking Age. Moving further into the Viking culture, it's essential to understand their societal norms and values related to physical appearance, which was significant in Viking society, and they took great care in maintaining their personal hygiene. Archaeological findings, including combs, tweezers, razors, and ear cleaners made from animal bones and antlers, support this fact strongly, as the Vikings' emphasis on appearance extended to their hair. Additionally, they also styled their hair and beards, contrary to the unkempt and wild images often portrayed of Vikings in popular media. Men typically wore their hair short at the back and longer at the front, while women wore their hair long, often adorned with metal hairpins and bands. The hot blonde image of Vikings is further fueled by the sagas and epic poems written during and after the Viking Age. These literary works often depict Viking heroes and heroines as blonde, tall, and muscular. However, it's worth noting that these sagas were written for entertainment and moral instruction, and their descriptions of characters may not accurately reflect the physical traits of the average Viking, but I bet they still do. The Viking Age was a time of exploration, expansion, and cultural exchange, but they sure did have one thing in common with their ancestors and those who came after them. They all loved blonde, fair-haired women, and who can blame them for that? Moving onward from Vikings and entering medieval Europe, in the 11th century, the Normans, a Viking people who had settled in northern France, invaded England. They brought with them a cultural preference for light hair, as evidenced by the high number of blondes depicted in the Bayeux tapestry. a contemporary record of the Norman conquest. This preference was likely influenced by their Scandinavian heritage, where blonde hair is more common due to genetic factors and the region's colder climate, which favored lighter pigmentation. In the 12th and 13th centuries, blonde hair became associated with youth and innocence in the Christian context, primarily due to depictions of the Virgin Mary with golden hair in religious art and literature. This association was further reinforced by the popularity of courtly love literature, where knights would often pledge their devotion to a fair maiden with golden locks. Moreover, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the fashion of wearing wigs made of blonde hair became popular among the European nobility. This was partly due to the influence of Queen Elizabeth I of England, who was known for her striking red-gold hair. The trend was also prevalent in France, where it was fashionable for women to bleach their hair. This was achieved using a variety of methods, including the application of saffron and onion skin dyes, as well as the use of sunlight and sour milk to lighten the hair. And just when you thought things couldn't get more weird, you learned that the fascination with blonde hair was not limited to women. Men, too, were known to dye their hair and beards blonde, particularly during the Renaissance period. This trend was observed among the upper classes, who often sought to distinguish themselves from the common populace through their appearance. And now, let's look at our friends from Asia and what they've thought of white hair. The concept of hot blondes in Asia is a modern one, originating from the influence of Western beauty standards and media. However, with the advent of hair dye and cosmetic procedures in the 20th century, the appearance of blonde hair in Asia has become more common. In the 1980s and 1990s, the popularity of Western pop culture in Asia led to a surge in the number of Asian women dyeing their hair blonde. This was further fueled by the rise of K-pop and J-pop in the 2000s, where many idols dyed their hair various colors, including blonde, as a form of self-expression and to stand out. While the trend of blonde hair in Asia was initially driven by the influence of Western media, it has since evolved into a unique cultural phenomenon. In the early 2000s, the Japanese gyaru subculture emerged, characterized by its members' tan skin, bleached hair, and heavy makeup. This was a significant departure from traditional Japanese beauty standards, which favored pale skin and dark hair. The gyaru subculture was seen as a form of rebellion against these traditional norms, and its members were often stigmatized and marginalized by mainstream society. Despite this, the gyaru subculture had a significant impact on Japanese fashion and beauty trends. Its influence can still be seen today, with many Japanese women continuing to dye their hair blonde or other bright colors. The gyaru subculture also spread to other Asian countries, including South Korea and China, further popularizing the trend of blonde hair. Despite its popularity, the trend of blonde hair in Asia has been criticized for promoting Western beauty standards at the expense of traditional Asian beauty standards. Critics argue that this trend reflects a form of cultural imperialism, where Western beauty standards are imposed on non-Western cultures. They also point out the potential health risks associated with hair dyeing, including hair damage and allergic reactions. However, proponents of the trend argue that it is a form of self-expression and individuality. They believe that beauty standards should not be dictated by race or culture, and that everyone should have the freedom to choose how they want to look. In the context of pre-colonial America, attractiveness was often linked to health and fertility. Blonde hair, being a novel trait, may have been considered attractive due to its rarity. The concept of hot blondes in pre-colonial America can be traced back to the arrival of Northern European settlers in the 17th century. And now, the 17th century Europe, where the term blonde has its roots, derived from the French word blonde, which means light-colored. The period also saw the rise of the term hot blonde, used to describe attractive women with blonde hair. The term was initially used in plays and literature, but quickly became a common descriptor in everyday language. By the end of the 17th century, the blonde hair trend had firmly established itself in Western society, setting a precedent for the centuries to come. As we move into the 18th century, the blonde hair trend continued to be prevalent. This was largely due to the influence of the French court, where blonde wigs and hair powders were still in fashion. However, a shift began to occur in the perception of blonde hair. It was no longer just a symbol of wealth and status, but also began to be associated with innocence and purity, particularly in women. This change in perception was reflected in the art and literature of the time, where blonde women were often depicted as virtuous and desirable. The 19th century saw a further evolution of the blonde hair trend, as the Industrial Revolution brought about new hair dye technologies, making it easier for women to change their hair color. This led to an increase in the number of women dyeing their hair blonde, and the term hot blonde began to be used more widely in the media, particularly in newspapers and magazines. This was a reflection of the changing societal norms, where attractiveness and desirability were increasingly linked to physical appearance. By the end of the 19th century, the term hot blonde had become a common part of the English language, used to describe attractive women with blonde hair. Entering the 20th century, the blonde hair trend underwent significant changes. The advent of cinema and the rise of Hollywood in the 1920s played a major role in shaping beauty standards. Actresses like Jean Harlow, known as the Platinum Blonde, and later Marilyn Monroe, became iconic figures, reinforcing the allure of blonde hair. Their popularity led to an increase in the number of women dyeing their hair blonde, and the term hot blonde became synonymous with Hollywood glamour and sex appeal. During the mid-20th century, the blonde hair trend was further popularized by the Barbie doll, launched in 1959, as the doll's blonde hair and blue eyes became a defining feature, influencing generations of young girls and further embedding the blonde hair trend in popular culture. The latter part of the 20th century saw a shift in the perception of blonde hair. While the term hot blonde continued to be used to describe attractive women with blonde hair, it also began to carry negative connotations, often being associated with stereotypes of being less intelligent or more silly. Despite these stereotypes, the blonde hair trend remained popular, with many women continuing to dye their hair blonde. As we transition into the 21st century, the blonde hair trend continues to evolve. The term hot blonde is still prevalent, but its meaning has become more diverse. It is no longer just a descriptor for physical attractiveness, but also signifies a certain attitude and confidence. This shift is largely due to the influence of popular culture, particularly music and film. In the early 2000s, pop culture icons like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, known for their blonde hair, dominated the music scene. Their success and popularity helped to redefine the term hot blonde, associating it with strength, independence, and talent. In the film industry, actresses like Reese Witherspoon in Legally Blonde challenged the stereotype of the dumb blonde, portraying blonde characters as intelligent and capable. This helped further redefine the perception of hot blondes, demonstrating that attractiveness and desirability are not just about physical appearance, but also about personality and intelligence. And it didn't end there, as blonde actresses continue to challenge stereotypes and redefine what it means to be a hot blonde. Characters like Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, portrayed by Emilia Clarke, and Harley Quinn from Suicide Squad, portrayed by Margot Robbie, are examples of hot blondes who are powerful, intelligent, and complex. The beauty industry played a role in the evolution of the blonde hair trend, as advances in hair dye technology made it easier and safer for women to dye their hair blonde, leading to an increase in the number of women choosing to go blonde. This further reinforced the popularity of the blonde hair trend, making it a defining feature of the 21st century beauty landscape. In the mid-21st century, the concept of hot blondes began to be challenged and redefined further. The rise of social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube allowed for a more diverse representation of beauty. Hot blondes were no longer just the fair-skinned, blue-eyed archetype of Hollywood, but included women of different ethnicities, sizes, and backgrounds who chose to dye their hair blonde. The term hot blonde also began to be reclaimed by women themselves. Rather than being a label imposed by society, it became a term of empowerment. Women chose to identify as hot blondes, not just because of their physical appearance, but because of their confidence, intelligence, and talent. In conclusion, the allure of blonde hair has a rich and varied history, spanning different civilizations and cultures. From the Greek gods to Roman empresses, from Viking warriors to Persian heroes, the golden locks have been a symbol of beauty, power, and distinction. Hopefully, you enjoyed the research on hot blondes, and when the next time you see one of these amazing creatures, be sure to say a few words and maybe even feed them a little. They're precious, you know. Be sure to watch our other videos as well, which should appear on the screen just about now. You can only see 2, but there are plenty more on our YouTube channel page. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and go surprise your imaginary friends with some new facts you just learned. History, but fast.